Welcome to the Risk and Repeat podcast, episode number 239. I'm Rob Wright, Security News Director at Tech Target, and I'm here with Senior News Writer Beth Pariseau. Welcome, Beth.
Hey, thanks for having me, Rob.
For the listeners out there, Beth hosts a wonderful podcast called IT Ops Query, now in its second season, which is exploring the state of SecOps. I can only imagine what that journey has been like. In fact, I want to ask you about that in a second.
Mhm.
But we are here today to discuss the, I guess, inaugural first progress report for Microsoft's Secure Future initiative.
Mhm.
Microsoft introduced this Secure Future initiative way back in November of last year. It was seen largely as a response to the Storm 0558 attacks, though there were other issues that the SFI appeared to address. Microsoft had to expand its SFI initiative in the spring this year after a totally different and more recent nation-state cyber attack by a different group, this time a Russian APT called Midnight Blizzard. When that occurred, they basically not went back to the drawing board, but sort of expanded its whole SFI plan, and indeed had a lot of criticism come its way from the Cyber Safety Review Board report, which was issued around the same time, which really took Microsoft to task for, I guess, what they termed as a series of serious security failures.
Yeah, cascading series of failures.
Cascade, yes.
It's very vivid.
Yes, very vivid. We could have a long conversation about the Storm 558 attacks and what's in the report and what's not in the report as it pertains to those breaches and the effects on the customers and sort of what Microsoft has done and what it hasn't done. But I wanted to kind of have a big picture discussion about the steps Microsoft is taking based on what it outlined in this report, sort of from the viewpoint of SecOps and even DevSecOps, because there's a lot of information in this report specifically about protecting Microsoft's engineering systems, its developers, its build pipelines, etc. So I wanted to talk with you, Beth, since you've covered a lot of this stuff. But before we dive into the report, I'm curious, what is the state of SecOps based on
Huh.
your conversations and your reporting? I know you've done 2 episodes for this season.
The
More,
fourth
okay.
out came out today,
Okay.
and I've done more recordings than that haven't been published yet.
Oh, great.
So far, when I ask that of guests, they all say it's better than it was, and it's better than you think,
Oh,
which isn't to say that there aren't problems.
yep.
However, SecOps has gotten more sophisticated as systems have gotten more sophisticated,
Hmm.
but so have attackers. It's also not an even, the phrase I've heard quoted is the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed.
Hmm.
The interesting thing I noted in one of the reports that I looked at before starting the season was that while the human factor remains the leading attack vector for data breaches, that has started to shrink and critical vulnerabilities have started to grow as a cause of data breaches. And I think, in these cases, Storm 0558 and Midnight Blizzard, these weren't somebody clicking on a phishing link.
No.
They weren't someone who's kind of clueless giving their password to someone they shouldn't. These were not human factor things. These were actually fairly sophisticated attacks by well-funded, nation-state actors. And so it is pretty representative, I think, of the fact that, the threat landscape is ever changing, as is the technology landscape. And things definitely seem to be still getting breached at a high rate.
Yeah.
Um, so obviously the state of SecOps needs improvement, but it isn't completely dismal, is the feedback that I've gotten from the experts I've talked to. That, there's frankly a ton to keep up with, but there are also a ton of new tools available. It's just a
Hmm.
matter of being able to use them. And reading this report, it struck me that a lot more companies than you might think probably look like Microsoft
Yeah.
internally
Hmm.
if they had to report to a federal agency on their security practices. You would probably find a similar proportion of legacy applications and resources that they don't have the bandwidth to address. That's a huge problem that I've been covering for years on the IT ops beat in general, and SecOps is no exception to that. Another thing that they identified as an issue, especially with the Midnight Blizzard attack, was these kind of old accounts hanging around, and
Hmm.
that's just classic technical debt. And if you think the state of SecOps is bad, I wonder if you scratch the surface of most companies, what kind of picture you'd find of their technical debt. So I guess to belatedly summarize, the state of SecOps is the glass is half empty and half full. There are absolutely problems, but well, I can continue a little bit more on kind of the recent trends, but generally, people have pointed out that there are silver linings.
Yeah. Right. Listen, I will take the silver linings because I'm a noted pessimist.
Same.
Uh, and working on this beat, it can leave you feeling not helpless, but like, wow, what are we gonna do? Sometimes you just want to throw up your hands.
Hmm.
So that's good. I'll take it. Uh,
Yeah, my guest this week, Kyler Middleton, talked about what she termed security nihilism.
yes, I'd listen to
Because
that.
if you keep getting this kind of like numbing drumbeat of breach disclosures every day, after a while, it's sort of like, what's the point? It's pretty easy when you're just bombarded with negative information to conclude that it's not possible to solve it and do nothing. So, yeah, I mean, those things are real too.
Yeah, security nihilism is definitely real, and I listened to that interview with great interest and especially took her point about the layered security
Mm,
approach, which I want to get to you later as it pertains to Microsoft. But going back to sort of your overall point regarding the SFI report about how, listen, if you put a number of other companies under a lens like this, they'd probably have similar issues.
hmm
I agree. Like I read this report, and on one hand, I thought to myself, it's really important that number one, they took the Cyber Safety Review Board report seriously and that they're responding to it. And you can see it correlates very like closely to some of the concerns that were outlined in that report. So they're addressing the things that DHS board said needed to be addressed. And they were pretty granular about some of the things that they were doing and going into detail about how they were, where they were in some of these progressions.
hmm
On the other hand, to your point about there's probably a lot of companies, probably most companies maybe in the same position as this. I was really struck by just some of the things regarding specifically like identity access management. You
hmm
know, there's a point in the report where Microsoft says we're limiting privileged access and
hmm
elevated roles for our engineering systems. We removed, there's a part here, I'll quote it. We removed persistent admin access for project collection admins, PCAs, and project admins, PAs, and are reducing membership for all other Azure DevOps roles like repo contributors, readers, feed owners, etc., to align with the principle of least privilege access. We have also initiated user access reviews every 180 days to ensure that all access is still valid, end quote. So I read that and I thought, all I've heard about for years is how important the principle of least privilege is.
hmm
Yet it seems to have eluded Microsoft in a very crucial area, developers and engineering systems. But at the same time, I don't, I'm guessing there's probably a reason that they have a lot of admin access. I don't know what a project collection admin or PCA does necessarily, but I'm guessing this is not unusual.
Uh, Probably not. It's also not ideal. And I think most of us would have expected that a company as well funded as Microsoft, that's as prominent in the cybersecurity space as Microsoft is, would be doing better than everybody else rather than in the same boat.
Hmm.
I do think that there probably were some assumptions that a lot of us would have made about Microsoft before this,
Yep.
that don't match the picture we're getting here. However, again, this is technical debt.
Yeah.
And all of these things, all of these efforts take time, which means money. And I think, some of the Microsoft reps that Ariel and Alex have talked to about this plan have um, spoken about the conflicting priorities of velocity and
Yep.
security.
Yep.
That's a time-honored conflict, and it doesn't just apply to them. Also there's the matter of their scale, okay? Because um, they have 100,000 engineers, product managers, and designers,
Hmm.
34,000 full-time engineers currently, and that doesn't count, I'm sure, all the contractors and other entities that are in and out of their identity and access management systems.
Hmm.
Um, they have 440,000 resources managed by a legacy API, Azure Service Management alone, and 73,000 unused applications. But proportionally, they talk about 500,000 work items being modified every day. So they have fewer than a day's worth of items, if you look at it that way,
Hmm.
managed by this legacy API. It's just that for them, that's still a massive amount. And it's still a massive number of opportunities for increasingly sophisticated threat actors to attack, which is exactly what happened with Midnight Blizzard.
Yeah.
The thing that actually encourages me about this, in addition to the transparency that they're showing, is the fact that since at least 2018, when DevSecOps became a trend on my radar, and I started to dig into this stuff, I have been asking the same question of people here and there, just what's it going to take?
Right.
What's it going to take for us to get our crap together as an industry and, stop getting just owned every day? And I think Microsoft may have just shown us that they have been hit hard enough for it to be, they use these words, a wake-up call.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like that you should exercise, that you should eat right, that you should get enough sleep, all this stuff. But it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, and then you have a heart attack,
Yep.
right? And then it's like, okay, I really do need to get serious about this. And I think that's kind of what's happened here with Microsoft, or at least that's the most optimistic way I can look at it. They got their butts handed to them, and they got dragged out before the federal government. And, they are showing the amount of urgency that is warranted for this issue. So then the question is, well, why now and why not before?
Hmm.
And I think I have an answer to that, but I don't want to just drone on forever here if you had
No,
another.
no, I'm interested in it as well. I've been sort of tossing this around in my head for a while, ever since they first announced this. And
Mm,
certainly after the CSRB report, I mean, which really called out Microsoft's security culture and basically said it needed to be overhauled.
yeah.
And I was just sort of, I'm like, are some of the things that are highlighted in the CSRB report and that they outline in this week's SFI report as a response. Were some of these things just not done because they prioritized speed and because they were, I mean, this is the nature of software development
Hmm.
and project management
Hmm.
and tech these days. You've got to move fast.
Hmm.
Or or some of these things just bad practices, oversights, just negligence. And I don't think it's negligence. I know they have a lot of smart people over there. I've talked to a lot of smart people over there. But then that if it's not just sort of inept security leadership and security practices, then you're talking about, well, this is probably a similar situation. Going back to your original point, this is probably a similar situation to a lot of companies out there because all of them are probably prioritizing go-to-market speed and
Yes,
fast development.
100%. And I don't think any enterprise company, IT professional that I talk to would ever say that 100% of their IT estate uses the most up-to-date, centralized, programmatically managed modern security practice,
Hmm.
right? So, and all it takes is one exception, right?
Hmm.
And for Microsoft, the one exception in 1,000 adds up to 440,000 resources. And who knows how many stale access tokens there are out there to mine.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, most companies I talk to are aware of newer practices in security and IT operations, and they're embracing them, but they start with the greenfield, and that legacy is a real problem. And
Hmm.
nobody has the bandwidth to compete in an increasingly fast-paced market for software products and go back and be completely fastidious and 100% sewn up in their modern security practices.
Hmm.
Some of the things that Microsoft has been doing, according to this report, are things that I don't think all enterprises or even most enterprises have gotten to yet in the kind of progress toward DevSecOps and cohesive, programmatic, modern cloud native cybersecurity. I have started to see in the era of platform engineering, once everyone admitted that the full stack engineer was not walking through that door, um, that what had been disparate, move fast and break things, developer environments, that meant to churn out new business features above all else are starting to become centralized with what they call guardrails by
Yeah.
platform engineers that at large enough organizations are modernizing that underlying infrastructure and trying to address that technical debt. But all of that is pretty recent. All of that was they started really talking about that at KubeCons like maybe 4 or 5 years ago
Hmm.
now, 3 or 4. The other thing I wanted to point out in terms of the why now and why not before is that the CSRB, the review board organization that called them to task in that devastating, scathing report, is 3 years old.
Yeah.
It was established by Executive Order 14028
Hmm.
in 2021. So, federal regulators finally caught up. I think in part. I think in part that's why now. I think we also have talked on my podcast quite a bit about how relatively young software engineering is as an engineering discipline. Unlike, building or civil engineering or mechanical engineering that's had hundreds of years to go wrong and be negligently done and develop standards and practices. The world that we're living in some cases, with the amount of connectedness of cloud and distributed applications and mobile applications, is about 4 years old
Yeah.
post-pandemic, right? Because
Hmm.
that's when things got really kicked into gear. And it's hard to remember sometimes, but we've all only had smartphones since like 2010, maybe. The first iPhone came out in 2008. And we've had now about 20 years since the first data breach notification laws went into effect.
Right.
And I think those things kind of had a domino effect that led to things like the creation of the Cyber Safety Review Board
Hmm.
and the other measures in that executive order that are now having results. And in part, we only had that deluge of breach notifications because they were required by law. So that those add up to shifting public attitudes about what the heck is going on at all these companies that they're getting breached left and right. Well, you know, we only know that because they have to tell us. So, that leads to this feeling of everything is horrible. But at the same time, it also leads to this moment of a wake-up call for a major company that is, by all appearances, trying to comply with the changes that have been requested at, again, a pretty unimaginable scale for most of us.
Yeah.
So it's not that I don't think anybody at Microsoft was, I don't think nobody at Microsoft was doing these things before, but
Hmm.
I can definitely believe that there wasn't any top-down, centralized, systematic 100% compliance across the board initiative. And that they have that in common with a lot of other companies. This board level awareness of cybersecurity risk is also maybe 4 or 5 years old, tops. Before that, it was like insurance, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, we know, and yeah, it could be bad, but it won't happen to us, right? Like that was
Right.
the attitude that I was hearing around 2018, 2019. And then serious stuff starts to go down and you get these wake up calls. And so at least we're getting them. And so far, the biggest ones have not involved any physical harm or mass loss of human life, which frankly is something that I've also been worried about, that that's what it would take.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're, like side note to that, I don't think we're far away from that happening. I think that's probably at some point in our near future if it hasn't already happened. I know that a number of organizations out there believe that ransomware attacks on hospitals have sort of indirectly led to patient deaths, although that's always hard to
Hmm.
like really quantify or prove. But yeah, I don't think that that's
Right. But I mean, yes, it's not that it hasn't happened at all, but
right.
you look at things like Volt Typhoon,
Yes.
and it could be so much worse. And
Hmm.
there are people doing work at the federal level that I have talked to recently that are aware that there is time sensitivity with that now.
Yep.
But and it's taken a while, maybe it's taken a frustratingly long time, but I do think that as a society and an industry, people are starting to get that wake up call now.
Yeah.
And, you can say, well, what took us so long? But it's also true that better late than never.
Yeah. And to your point that you made about the unimaginable scale,
Mm,
this came up in sort of discussions about Microsoft prior to the SFI progress report that came out on Monday. Just in talking to different people over the last month, however many months since it was first announced, just this idea of Microsoft being like, the old sort of trope of it's an aircraft carrier and it's hard to turn something
hmm.
around that big. But just like reading through this report and seeing some of the numbers, they talked about protecting tenants and isolating production systems. They're talking about 730,000 unused apps that they
Yeah,
eliminated.
I can totally believe it. I totally
5.7,
believe it.
yeah, 5.7 million inactive tenants. Like, who
Sure.
knows how many like actual accounts and roles and permissions and stuff that they had to reduce. So I guess my question is there's this concept that Microsoft has so many people and so much money and unlimited not unlimited, but you get the point. They
Hmm.
should be doing security better, but are we thinking about this perhaps incorrectly or not big picture enough? because what we're dealing with here in Microsoft is this enormous company with so many different moving parts
Mm,
and so many different just departments,
hmm
lines of business, products. I can't imagine what must go into securing all that. And this isn't to give them an out, but like I've often wondered, is Microsoft, I think I actually brought this up on a previous podcast about SFI with Alex or Ariel or both, but like, is there just a line of demarcation, a point of no return? You get so big that you like at this stage in time,
mm,
you just can't secure an aircraft carrier, a company
mm,
that big with that many network resources, that huge an environment, that sprawling of an environment with that many different employees, et cetera, et cetera. And it's pretty chilling to think of it that way, but at the same time, like you see all these things that they eliminated and they're trying to shrink the attack surface. It seems like they really made a dent, but then I think to myself, well, if they were getting rid of that amount of unused apps and inactive tenants, how many active apps and
mm,
tenants and roles and employees? And it's just staggering. And I
hmm
wonder, like, if that's just if we're not thinking of Microsoft sometimes the right way as like this as that aircraft carrier, as that sort of sprawling environment that's really challenging to secure.
Well, and that can be a problem in itself, right? The old too big to fail thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, antitrust regulators have been after Microsoft for decades, right?
Hmm.
With exactly that kind of argument about them. And, it also their profile and their size and their presence in virtually every consumer's home, at least in the United States and many businesses, makes them more of a target.
Right.
Like most companies also are not the focus of a special team within China that is directed, by
Yep.
the state.
Hmm.
And Russia, right? They have a bigger target on their back too, in part because of their size and their ubiquity,
Hmm.
and because of their legacy. I would say that there's probably of the big three cloud providers, they're the oldest as a company.
Yep.
And, I think that might mean they have more legacy to worry about than, say, Amazon or Google, which are of at least remotely comparable size
Sure.
at this point. But, those like startups today, they can start with the whiz bang cloud native sophisticated stuff. They don't have as much of a legacy to worry about. So it's kind of a confluence of factors between the size, the age of the company, and, the fact that threat actors know that the federal government uses their tools
Hmm.
and know that that's a path that they can use to infiltrate systems that are highly sensitive and relevant to their interests. So it's sort of one of those victims of their own success thing. But I just would really be surprised if even Amazon and Google could say that, they have 99% of their systems, following a centralized, organized security program.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's the difference is
Yeah.
that a lot of companies have really, again, before this more recent sharp awareness of cybersecurity risks, a lot of companies have been geared toward giving developers choices and letting them move fast, giving them flexibility, having a nimble, agile, um, highly productive software factory that is many different things that you can't really describe one way across the board.
Sure.
And it's definitely a trend that I've seen very recently among large enterprises where, they've had pockets of things like S-bombs or
Yep.
AI-enabled vulnerability scanning tools or zero trust secure by design applications. And then they've also had some middle of the road stuff. And then they've had some true legacy stuff that nobody knows what to do with. And it's that mixed bag. So the fact that Microsoft is going through this undertaking of getting everything in lockstep, or at least trying to,
Hmm.
is not for the faint of heart, certainly. I really can't underestimate what that takes. And yeah, I think for them it's just they have more of a legacy than other major players in cloud.
Right. More technical debt, more, yeah,
Hmm.
more legacy systems,
Hmm.
more code. Just think about the sheer amount of code that
Yeah.
they, yeah, hard.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't know. I just think technical debt is it's just one of those kind of it also has been one of those sort of hygiene prophylactic preventive maintenance kind of problems that it's really easy to brush aside in favor of the new shiny object
Yeah.
until it comes back to haunt you. So but I think that is happening, the
Hmm.
coming back to haunt us. And I hope that initiatives like this continue because I think it's also like it's also easy to get religion and get on that program while you're still being watched and held to account and
Yeah.
then to kind of let it fall off again, because this is not Microsoft recognizes that this is an existential issue for them.
Hmm.
Um, but they can afford less than most companies, I'd say, to gamble that it won't be them again next time, right? Other companies can still rationalize a lot more easily because they aren't as big a target. And it's really easy to say, yeah, 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 I'll get to that. And then it just never happens, right?
Right. No, I think you're right. And I think overall, this report, at the very, very least, at the sort of ground level, whatever you want to say about it, it seems to really demonstrate that they're taking that seriously and that they're taking the recent breaches in the CSRB report to heart and acting on it in a way that's pretty impressive.
Mm,
I can sit here and quibble with like, where's this or where's that or what, but it's pretty staggering when you look at all the things that they have to do and all the things that they've done so far. I do
yeah.
wonder if it's going to lead to more companies sort of following suit, taking Microsoft's. It seems weird to say Microsoft's lead because they're doing this in
Mm,
response to some bad news, but
mm,
you know, uh, but we'll see. We'll see
yeah.
because to your point, they are doing a fair amount in there in this report that a lot of other companies, major tech companies, probably are not. So,
Yeah, we can hope that this is the wake up call, that, has been kind of a long time coming.
right.
Um, I do think that to some extent, the pandemic woke up a lot
Yep.
of enterprises to the fact that we're now in a software-defined world, we're in a cloud-defined world, and that cybersecurity risks are existential, and not just insurance type questions. And I have been hearing for a couple of years now about board of directors and C-suite level awareness of cybersecurity risks and inquiries about that to the lower ranks. And, we can hope.
Fingers crossed.
Mhm.
Well, Beth, thank you so much for joining me to discuss the SFI progress report and sort of the big picture issues around it. I really, really appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
And thank you to the readers and listeners of Tech Target and the Risk and Repeat podcast. I'm Rob Wright, and we will see you next time.